Mindful eating is a fantastic way to introduce your students to mindfulness. You're listening to the Teach Mindfulness podcast. My name is Shamash Aladina and we're talking mindful eating. Now, if you've done any training in teaching mindfulness, you know that quite often it's quite popular to bring some raisins into the first class and actually give everyone a small raisin or a large raisin and ask them to mindfully and slowly eat it over a period of a few minutes in which you actually guide the practice. And the reason this is done is because of we're eating all the time. We're normally on autopilot. So this is an opportunity to teach your students that actually we're so often on this mode of autopilot, of being mindless rather than mindful. And within a few minutes, you can show them the power of mindfulness. When we slow down, when we connect with our senses, our experiences change. We shift from our normal mode of multitasking into actually being present to do one activity. And we also realize how difficult it is, how much the mind wanders, how easy it is to go back to autopilot. But also for some people, how nourishing it is to have that initial experience of being present with eating. I want to share with you a few more tips if you want to develop your teaching for mindful eating. And first of all, you don't have to just use a raisin. You can use other small pieces of fruit. You can even use something like a small piece of chocolate. Or you could just invite the students to choose any food that they want. For example, if you're teaching online and they're at home, you can ask them to get any small piece of food. It could even be one chip. I've done it with a McDonald's chip before. You can do it with crisps. So it can be done with multiple foods. It doesn't have to just be with a raisin. It's just used for convenience. So that's the first thing. Secondly, when you're guiding it, you can actually go through the senses. So you can go through sight. So you look at it. Sound with some foods. If you just gently squeeze it near your ear, you can actually hear some sound, so you can get them to connect to sound. Obviously, there's smell, and then there's a sense of touch, and then finally taste. Now, there's also other things you can do. So rather than just being present with the actual food that they're eating, you can also invite them to start reflecting. So they can reflect on how many people would they estimate, or how many people could they imagine would be involved in bringing this food to them. You know, all the people that grew the food, that picked the food, that transported it, that brought it to their local shop, and then maybe they bought it or someone else brought it, to it being in their hand. They can be grateful that they've actually got food. So many people are not that fortunate, so reminding them of that. It can even be a bit of a compassion practice, a sense of connecting with others in gratitude for what they've done and wishing them well. So you can actually bring different elements of mindful skills with mindful eating. But for absolute beginners, you could just connect with the senses, go through each of the 5 senses as they eat. And remember to give your students space to share when their mind is wandering, or if they're having a difficult experience. Let them feel comfortable with you to share that. So it's not just trying to get positive feelings, but whatever feelings come up, honouring them. That's an important aspect of teaching mindfulness. So there's some tips that come to mind when it comes to mindful eating. But what about when you want to give them some home experiments? I call it experiments rather than homework. Or you can call it a challenge. You can call it a weekly challenge to make it more fun. And invite your students to have a go at having some meals mindfully. Now, to just say, have all your meals in a mindful way and just saying it like that, it probably won't work because if we're so powerfully on auto. So maybe ask them to pick a certain day and a certain meal in which they're going to be mindful. And you can give a few more tips, which I will share now, to encourage mindfulness when they're eating. So first of all, no distractions. So they could turn off their phones and their computers and all the other stuff. So they're just them and the meal. Ideally not with someone else as well. Of course, you can eat mindfully with others, but when they're just beginning to learn about mindfulness, it might be better for them to be on their own with the food. And then another little great trick is to use the opposite hand than what they would normally use. So, for example, if they're left-handed, then they eat with their right hand. If they're right-handed, they eat with their left hand. And that's because of, again, you're not doing your normal habitual pathways of behaving when you're eating the food. So there's another idea. Another tip is to actually use a stopwatch or a timer, so they can decide that, okay, I'm going to spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes eating this meal. And so if they set the timer and put that in front of them, then they can see that if they're rushing it too much and the timer's still got lots of time left and they've just gobbled down the food. So that can be a helpful aid. And just slowing down their eating. So, if they normally would eat in 5 or 10 minutes, maybe they should set a timer for double that, 20 minutes. And so they eat at half the speed. And when you do any activity at half the speed, it actually starts to automatically cultivate mindfulness. So it's a nice tip, not just for mindful eating, but any activity. You don't have to do activities slowly to be mindful, but when you do them more slowly than usual, it does naturally bring more mindfulness up. So there's a bunch of tips there on teaching mindful eating and practicing mindful eating and setting it as a weekly challenge for your students. If you found this helpful, check out our websites. Thanks a lot for listening. See you in the next one.